This episode of Igalia Chats is brought to you by Igalia, an open source consultancy with a proven track record of landing features in devices from XR to handheld, deep expertise with embedded devices, advancements in flagship web browsers, kernel contributions, and much more. To get in touch or to learn more, visit igalia.com.
Okay, hi, I'm Brian Kardell. I'm a developer advocate at Igalia.
And my name is Eric Meyer. I'm also a developer advocate at Igalia. And today we have another person from Igalia.
Hello, I'm Nicolò. I'm at Igalia on the compilers team, and I'm maintainer of Babel, which is why I'm here today. For those that don't know, it's like a JavaScript tool that takes some JavaScript code in and transforms it to code that works in all the browsers. So you can I don't know, maybe there is some new JavaScript cool feature that you want to try, and you cannot because your customers, the people using your website, might be in a browser that's not been released yesterday. So this new cool JavaScript feature is not going to work in their browser. So you can still write it in your source code, then you give it to Babel, and Babel gives you something that your customers can actually run.
So is it that there's a whole bunch of stuff in it that will basically backport or polyfill older browsers, and so as new stuff gets written, people are adding backward polyfills for those things?
Yeah, that's kind of like it works. There are like two parts to it. There is like JavaScript has new syntax and new built-in functions. Babel mostly takes care of the syntax, so it actually like rewrites it to older code. Like for example, when 10 years ago we got let and const for variables, Babel would like rewrite it to var, so it would also work in browsers without let and const support. But then it also has some like integrations for automatically injecting like polyfills that are like JavaScript implementations of new built-ins, so that if you have like a array that includes function that maybe doesn't work in some browser, it's going to inject some code to load an external polyfill that makes that work.
Okay, so if someone's using temporal JavaScript,
Yeah,
for example, it might inject Moment.js or some other thing that will.
yeah, something like that. Like not exactly like not Moment.js, but like some exact implementation of the temporal proposal that
Okay.
works exactly how it would work if it was implemented built in the browser.
Wow, and who would write that polyfill?
Very few people actually. Babel has maybe 2 or 3 integrations, but there are basically 2 popular polyfills, and that's it. And like for at least for the JavaScript standard library, and like just everybody relies on them. That are Core.js and the shims, and it's literally 2 people in the whole world that do that because I guess they like it.
I think Babel is there's a history here which I would like to talk about because I find it very interesting. I always like the history and to think about where you're coming from, where you're going. But I think Babel was like in the news and getting a lot of hype, a lot more maybe 5 years ago or so. And I think it's less now. But there's an interesting thing that we were talking about before the show, which I think is like part of the reason why we're talking about this today, which is like I have this stat on Wikipedia that says it was downloaded 16 million times a week in 2019. But you also just looked. And what was the stat that you came up with?
Yeah, it's now 61 million times per week.
That seems like a lot of growth in 6 years.
So it's basically also like I think something like 1 in 1,000 downloads is Babel Core.
Yeah, so a lot of this growth is like, I don't think it's real growth as in Babel getting more popular. It's just that JavaScript keeps getting more popular and NPM just keeps growing and growing. And Babel, I think it's like close to have saturated the possible market share. And so at this point, it's just growing with the ecosystem. So like if it's likely that if total downloads in NPM double, downloads for Babel will also roughly double. Then I don't know how much ecosystem grew. It's possible Babel had some growth in the past 5 years, but I don't think it's just that it got 6 times more popular.
Yeah,
Okay.
probably. And there probably are like projects built on projects and projects that are forks of projects. And there's lots of ways for things to, get lots more usage numbers like that. But anyway, this is like the point is it is a really mature, stable project at this point that a lot of stuff depends on. And I think you were saying to me that it's one of the most stable projects.
Yeah, I mean, compared to most other tools in the area, we tend to disappear, as in Babel is configured by something, and then ideally you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about migrating the next major version or, oh no, this update broke everything. I mean, it's possible to introduce bugs, but like the intention is that it just stays there silent and does its job. It was not like that in the past. We caused a bunch of migrations that caused pain to every single user. Like Babel 5 to Babel 6 forced everybody to learn about Babel plugins, and then Babel 6 to Babel 7, we just renamed every single package. But that was maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And like we now try to make it so people don't have to worry about it anymore.
So when you say we, you said you're a maintainer of Babel.
Yeah.
One of many, or where are you fitting in the Babel infrastructure?
We are 3 main maintainers. The maintainer group has been the 3 of us for maybe 5 years at this point. There have been various generations of like a core group of maintainers. Then there is a bunch of people that just stick around. Like, for example, we often get some reviews from maintainer of related projects that just keep an eye on how Babel works. Or there are some specific areas of the code base that are mostly maintained by somebody that's not the 3 of us. Or sometimes the old maintainers show up and say, look, you would do this thing, or give ideas. But yes, like there is this little core with the 3 of us, and then there's a bunch of community friends around the project.
That is not many people to maintain a project like that. It sounds like it would be really time intensive. Where are you finding the time?
The 2 other maintainers are actually like paid to work part-time on Babel. I'm also like at Igalia have some work time to spend on it. So like in total, there is actually more than one full-time person maintaining it. It's still not a lot, but like it's enough to like keep the project not only afloat, but actually evolve the rest of the ecosystem.
Nice.
I mean, maybe that's one of the benefits of it being super stable is that it doesn't need to be doing like a lot of super rethinking, and that can happen with new projects. Like I think especially when you make breaking changes, there's a lot of, hey, we can kind of do whatever we want, and then you end up touching a lot of code and making a lot of work to effectively keep the same functionality in a lot of ways. So I think it's interesting and good that it's in this kind of like really stable state, and it has some financial support enough to keep it relevant and keep it going. You also mentioned to me when we're talking about stability, what's the earliest version that Node?
Babel still supports Node 6. Actually, I didn't look it up, but I'm curious to know how old Node 6 is. I think it's Node 24 now, so that's been 18 releases. Node 6 might be 9 years old at this point, which is actually very annoying as a maintainer to have to worry about compatibility with something that old.
Node 6 was officially released on April 26th, 2016.
Almost 9 years. It'll be 9 years this coming month.
Amazing.
Yeah, eventually, like in a couple of months, we'll drop support for Node 6. We will have a new major release that keeps most of the public API the same, but it like removes a bunch of internal workaround needed for compatibility with old stuff. And like we're gonna drop all Node versions up to I think 18 or something like that, because like they're not officially maintained anymore.
Can we talk about the history of this a little bit? Because I find this very interesting because there's some things that intersect with my own kind of like personal development and personal thoughts and views that also lead into some questions that I would like to ask. So I remember back in like 2009, we had Jeremy Ashkenaz made CoffeeScript, and it was I guess transpiler, like it would transpile CoffeeScript into JavaScript, and it was like maybe the first thing that I saw that got popular that was like you could create a new language that had like a slightly different syntax but was like familiar enough. You could do cool things with it. And I think at that same time, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at that same time we were still in the pre-Harmony era of JavaScript.
Yeah.
And if people don't know what that is, there was a long period in JavaScript where nothing happened. There was this attempt to do what was called like JavaScript 2 was the brand that they were going for there. And you'll note that there is sort of like no JavaScript 2. There was, but it never happened. So there's a little bit like when you track the HTML versions, right? Like you get these like
HTML 3.0 and
exactly,
which never was released.
Never really was a thing. So that was very big, and it was like, I guess not totally different than what we wound up with, but it was really heavily inspired by Java and stuff like that. And it was like, I think not even remotely backward compatible, and like all this stuff. And it seemed like very dominated by a few committees. And then we did start to get these proposals together, and things started to change somewhere around that same time. And I remember the Tracor compiler that came out in 2011, and that was done by some people at Google, including like Alex Russell. And right around that time, I was beginning to talk myself to a bunch of people, Yehuda Katz, Alex Russell, Marcos Caceres, Francois Remy, like a small group of people. And we were talking about all these things and coming up with this thing that eventually wrote down as the Extensible Web Manifesto. And the idea was like, what if we could build tools like this so that it wasn't just in a committee, right? Like, because one of the problems with that is that it could take 7 or 10 years and it might not go anywhere. And even if it does go somewhere, sometimes you get through that committee and it's so much like group thought that when we get it and real developers try to use it, it's underwhelming or even bad. So the idea was like, can we somehow incorporate this into standards so that we get proposals to people, it gets transpiled, and because of that, it's not like we can change the proposal along the way because you transpile it, it's a compile time thing. It can kind of mean something different in between compiles. It's not going to break at runtime, which would be a big deal. It's just like a library that you're using. And then, importantly, can we find a way to take that feedback and do useful things with it to know if we're doing a good job, if there should be changes to that, if people are adopting it. And I think that along the way, there was like several generations that you can speak to a lot of. Originally, I think this started out as a project called 6 to 5 by Sebastian McKenzie. And then there was also ES Next, right?
Yeah, that's correct. It was like these two projects just merged together to create Babel. But it was after Tracor. Babel is like from 2015, I think.
Yeah.
So it's been a few years in between.
And even the way that that's worked has, like you said, changed in some breaking ways. There was like these polyfills, and then there was like, the target is ES6. And then it's like, well, maybe it's just like these browsers. And there's, well, the last 3 browsers. And so you've kind of like come along how that's been done. And I'm wondering, like, can you maybe tell the story of some of those evolutions, but also answer the question, like, have we done any efforts to see how we incorporate that and like get into getting feedback and looking at data and knowing, like, have we used that in some way to help shape the standards?
Yeah, that's a lot of questions, a lot of points. So just disclaimer, I only got involved with Babel in 2017. So my memories of what was before is actually indirect experience, like from other maintainers talking about it. But yeah, like Babel started, as you said, as like Sebastian's project. It was called 6 to 5, and then it merged with another project. And I think at the beginning, the two maintainers were Sebastian and James Kyle. And from there, it was kind of like there was some sort of competition with Tracor. Like everybody wanted to be the project that people would use. And then, like over time, Babel stayed around. I believe Tracor now is much less used. I don't know if it's still maintained. So Babel started doing exactly what Tracer did. Then there have been some innovations along the way. Like you mentioned, Brian, the support for specifying, oh, I want to support these browsers, or I want my code to be compatible with this and this thing. I believe that came to Babel around 2017, maybe. There was like a preset called Babel preset TMV. It was an experiment from some other maintainer. I believe it might have been Brian NG, but I'm not sure. That basically took some external project called Browsers List that had this database of which browser versions were available and like some usage stats that I believe it gets from Can I Use. And it took this data, it took this project to transform like human readable queries, like the last 3 browsers into an actual list of browser support, and then Babel has mappings for each browser to a list of features, and so then it knows what to transpile. And I believe that has probably been the largest innovation that Babel brought to transpiling JavaScript. It was not an entirely new idea. Like as I mentioned, browsers list already existed, and I believe it was used for some CSS transpiling, but like Babel was the first tool bringing that to JavaScript. And probably that will be the largest impact that Babel. And then like, yeah, we kept experimenting with many things over the years. Like at some point there was a Babel minifier that was using Babel architecture to, well, minify your code. Because like in the end, a minifier is just another sort of transform that takes some input code and gives some output code. That's not maintained anymore due to lack of maintainers. But yeah, we've done a bunch of things. We've implemented many proposals. Actually, the way I got involved in Babel and in TC39 was by implementing various versions of decorator's proposal. It was like, it's been a proposal for more than 10 years probably, and like it's one of the most popular ones, and everybody wanted it. And in the standardization process, we went through like 4 or 5 different designs, and like in Babel we were implementing all of them one by one. I think at some point we skipped one just because the proposal kept changing so quickly it was impossible for us to actually keep up with it. Yeah, but like we actually let people experiment with various versions of the proposal and like say, oh, this is good, this is terrible, this is incredibly slow, this is not very usable. And we did bring some of that feedback back to TC39, and the proposal is almost done now, hopefully.
Hopefully it'll be really good because we had some, a lot of touch along the way. It wasn't just, theory and performance concerns, and, like it was a lot of testing on it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like you get a sense that it's, fit for survival, more or less.
What do decorators do again?
Decorators are some syntax that you can use to call some function that can modify class methods, class fields, classes themselves. For example, you could say, oh, I have this method. I have a decorator that's like a logger, and like I write @logger before the class method, and every time you call the class method, it will log something.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been interesting, and I was watching it develop like early on, and I think maybe I used probably your stuff through Babel at some stage, and then I didn't. I used to use it in Java, and I don't know. I guess like things like JSDoc aren't that, but they're similar in nature to how you do them. But I think there was a lot of that in things like Spring and Java that were pretty cool. Speaking of this comparison with Java that I'm making out of nowhere, there's an aspect of this that I think is really important that I mentioned earlier, which is that like you can use a proposal and it is compiled into something that you can guarantee remains the same, right? So it's like if you use a version of jQuery, you know that you chose that version of jQuery and it's just going to keep working unless the browser itself breaks or something, right? Like, so you can think about it as I'm trying out a proposal. I know that this is, I can treat it as like almost like a library in practice, even though I'm using it to, I hope this is what becomes the standard, and it allows me to really lower the cost of me somehow participating in that and learning about it early and being a part of the process. But I think that fact that you do it like at compile time like that is really important. And it reminds me of a thing that contrasts those two in Java and JavaScript. So, we have collections, like arrays and maps and sets and things like that in Java or, in any programming language. And in Java, you had like, eventually we got types for collections. So those are done through erasure, and it's like a lot like TypeScript is. And I think TypeScript you can do through Babel as well, right?
Yep.
But this thing with collections is in both of the specs. This is actually part of how I got involved in standards, which is why I know anything about this probably. So at one point in time, both of the Java and the JavaScript specs said like, oh, well, if you have like a hash map or you have an object with properties in JavaScript, you can iterate over the keys, basically, more or less. Like you can iterate over the properties, but the order is completely undeterministic, like it's just like whatever order. But in practice, in both of those, it was always more or less insertion order, right? Like it was more or less. There were some funky cases where like you used numbers as the keys or something, but more or less, whatever order you inserted the keys, that's the order that it would iterate. And so even though that was not what the spec said, people came to learn that you could do that. And they were like, I can do useful things with this. And so they started to do a lot of useful things with it. And sometime around the same time, both of them changed. Now in browsers, it only changed, I believe it was Opera that was like trying to eke out more performance, and they came up with a way to do that. And they reasoned that it would be fine because the spec said you don't need to have an order. So they just found what they thought was a really efficient way to do this that didn't maintain the insertion order. And they said, because the spec says you don't have to. And in Java, when that broke, it was like, it's not like anything broke overnight. It broke when you rebuilt it and sent it to QA. You know what I mean? Like you try to do some QA, like stuff just didn't work, and you had to figure out, oh, I see, I have to update these things. It's not a big deal. You just change to use a different collection. But in JavaScript in the browser, all kinds of things broke, like Gmail broke, and like big major properties. And so I think that this idea that Babel and transpilers use is really powerful, but also then it does mean that things are like sort of frozen in time. And like if you build your website and then you don't touch it for 2 or 3 years, like, are you still polyfilling stuff that maybe you don't need to polyfill anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that's good and not bad. Like your website is guaranteed to keep working if you use something that's actually unstable, because the unstable part is just shipped together with your website as if you're shipping your own virtual machine or something like that. And like, yes, you could improve your website probably. Like if you're using some proposal that then becomes standard, you don't need to transpile with Babel anymore. So you could improve your website, make your code smaller or something, just removing Babel from the equation. But like, at least it's not breaking, which is probably more important than, oh, you could have had some optimization thanks to something was released last year, but you're not benefiting from it.
It's a super interesting conundrum in a way, like to balance those two things, because I like the Extensible Web Manifesto, when we wrote it, it came from this Extensible Web community group where we had a lot of these discussions. And this exact topic was the topic of a lot of things where people would say, yeah, but I want it to be optimal. So, when I write code that uses a polyfill, I put it conditionally so that it doesn't, people used like yep nope. Remember yep nope modernizer? Remember?
Yep.
And they say, I only load it conditionally. And I was like, yeah, but when you wrote this, you didn't know whether it would change or not. So how can you, like, I mean, if you
Yeah.
say this is how array iteration works, and then you're like, okay, well, array iteration is supported now, so just automatically assume that you don't load this. But what if it doesn't work the way it worked when you compiled it, right?
Yeah, that's actually a big problem in JavaScript. Like for when it comes to Babel, like to like the main thing that Babel does, which is transforming syntax, you cannot really do that conditionally because like you cannot do like if the syntax is supported, then use the syntax, otherwise not, because like your whole file needs to be syntactically valid. So Babel just unconditionally transpiles everything to like whatever you're asking it to do. But when it comes to runtime features, so to polyfills, like to custom implementations of built-in functions, some polyfills just do that unconditionally. So like we might have a polyfill for the new set intersection union methods that just does set.prototype.union equal and then some implementation. And then there are other polyfills that do that conditionally. So they check if the set.intersection method exists, and if it does not, it defines it. And like this second types of polyfills actually causes problems in standards and in like in evolving the language, because maybe a browser shipped some proposal that then after shipping the standard body realized, oh, actually we need to tweak the behavior in this or this way. And then we cannot actually tweak the behavior because something breaks because it has this conditional polyfill that just stops polyfilling with the old behavior, and so it like automatically triggers the new behavior. So yeah, it's also a problem in JavaScript, just not when it comes to syntax. It happened very recently with scoped custom elements.
These were my positions like very early, so I'm very pleased to be right about that. So originally, this project I know from the 6 to 5 because Sebastian wrote a piece in 2015 or something like that, where he talked about like the early development of this. He was like 17. He was like, this like started out as a hobby project that he did in high school, and he ended up getting a job out of like his first job, and then also like his second job, and maybe even his third job. And that involved them paying for him at least part of his time to work on 6 to 5, right? But then I think at some point, maybe in 2015, 16, 17, I know that's a big range, but I don't know when exactly, it, I think, was Open Collective funded, right? Like it began to...
Yeah. So when I joined the project in 2017, Sebastian already was not involved anymore. So I don't know exactly what happened before I joined, but like at the time, in 2017, we had an Open Collective page where we were receiving donations from a bunch of companies, and that was enough to pay a maintainer to spend some time on the project paid, not as part of their main job, but through donations. We also had other maintainers that like doing that as part of the job. Like there was Henry Zhu working at Adobe that had like maybe 40% of his time dedicated to Babel, until when then he actually quit Adobe and started working full-time on Babel, paid through Open Collective donations. And it's been great. Like Babel is one of the projects that received the most funding through Open Collective in the JavaScript build tools ecosystem. It's like Babel and Webpack at the top, especially like maybe 8 years ago. And then everybody else like an order of magnitude behind, which actually made it possible for us to improve a lot the project. And it was not just luck. Like it's not just that, oh, money is arriving, great. But like some of the maintainers were spending significant amount of time going around and knocking at the door of companies saying, hey, use Babel, please give us some money. Like at some point, Henry was doing that almost full time, just asking for money to make it possible to pay other maintainers. And yeah, and then like it's been decreasing over time, especially since COVID. Companies started laying off employees, but like before laying off employee, you look at your budget and you cut all the unnecessary expenses, such as donating to open source projects. But like we can still pay 2 maintainers to work part-time on the project now. And then there is me, who I'm like, as part of my job at Igalia, I have some time to spend on Babel.
So that's Igalia is covering your time.
Yeah.
And then the other maintainers are being paid out of the collective.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
And I don't think the other maintainers have like a job that would let them work on Babel.
Right.
A really nice thing about working at Igalia, I think, is that if you have something that you believe should be done for whatever reason, really, I mean, you can propose to the assembly that this is the thing that I would like us to do, and we can discuss it and often do it. So I think it's great that we do that kind of thing.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I learned before joining Igalia that made me decide to try applying, and then it went well. Even though at the beginning, I was still paid. When I first joined Igalia, I was like maybe working some percentage of my time on like Igalia things, and then the other percentage of the time, like paid by Igalia, and then the other percentage of my time was actually still paid through Open Collective, like my time spent on Babel, or at least part of it. But then as donations went down, Igalia stepped up more to like cover all of it for me.
Do you know how much money has been raised by?
It's probably more than $1 million in the history of Babel, $1 million.
All over the like entire history of collective funding of Babel. Okay.
A large part of this donation is actually coming from very few companies or individuals. Like there was MPHTML was a big sponsor. Our largest sponsor, I think, is Airbnb. That's responsible for like a quarter of our total donations. At some point, we even like published some articles saying like Babel is running out of money because like during COVID donations dropped so much that we were like receiving half of what we were spending, and like 2 people from Japan together donated like almost $100,000 like that.
Wow.
Yeah, which was, I don't really know what was going on there, but was happy about that. And yeah, but like donations has still been decreasing. Like we have a couple big sponsors now. We have some sponsors that are a bit maybe sketchy and probably just do it to get their little logo on our website. We discussed that a lot internally, like do we want to have sponsors with questionable values? But like in the end, what we decided was that, well, we cannot afford losing all of them. So either other companies step up, or we're just gonna keep accepting money from whoever gives us money.
So this is it's a little bit of an interesting thing. We just had breakout sessions at W3C, and we were talking about this like collective, I don't know, evolution of how we think about open source and like all the different ways that we try to fund it. And so we have like the model where it was like originally you had like the people paying him to work part-time, and now like Igalia is paying you to work part-time. I think you said like Henry was paid part-time by Adobe. Then we have like funding through the collective, which can be individuals or companies, and they can pay either like a single lump sum or a recurring thing, either annually or monthly, or people can hire Igalia. Like if you had a really specific bunch of work or bugs that you needed fixed in Babel or whatever, you could totally come talk to us. Like, or you could do it yourself, or another company could fund the work. Or it's interesting to me, like all the variables in this and which things feel to you more sort of sustainable, because like I do think that the fact that I looked it up, it was like 1.5 million is the total amount that it's raised, and it looks like it's pretty close to $118,000 annually right now. But it, like you say, it's been falling, and it's that plus, like that doesn't account for what Igalia sponsors you to do, right?
Yeah. It also does not account for like fees that we pay to Open Collective to use the platform.
So there's benefits to all of these things. I mean, I think that it's like doesn't have to be all one or all the other, but certainly to me it does seem like monthly recurring contributions is a pretty good way.
Yeah, it's like, I guess it's all about trade-offs. The two best things are either being employed by a company to work on the project, or having a monthly recurring contribution from some company. When it comes to actual donations, like company money, the monthly is much better because it makes it easier to plan. Because like monthly contributions are somewhat more stable than like somebody doing one time every once in a while. So it actually makes it possible to say, okay, we have this much amount of money now, and we're probably gonna get about this amount of money in the next like 6 months or next year. So it makes it possible to actually like decide to have some maintainer that spends some fixed amount of time and actually has some regular income from that. And then there is like the other model, like the one that's working for me right now, where I'm employed by Igalia to work on the project. And like this feels more stable to me. At least I don't have to constantly worry about money and about fundraising. But at the same time, it gives me less freedom. Like if other Igalia tasks are requiring more of my time, I feel like, well, I should focus more on those than on the Babel part, because Babel is not the thing that's like making me have a job at Igalia. While if I was entirely paid through donations, I would like, well, that's just my job. I would spend as much time as I want on it.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of tension that I was thinking, because you were saying like, it's the best thing is probably if you're employed by a company to do it because it's less volatile, but I don't know that it is. I mean, I think you should feel like we allocate this money for you to do that, and you should 100% do that. But I get exactly what you're saying, and I would imagine not all companies are like Igalia. I have worked for other corporations, so I could see we're late on this other project, and like maybe don't do the Babel work for the next 6 months.
And isn't the Sovereign Tech Fund?
Yeah, that's very recent news. There is like this part of the German government that goes around and funds like infrastructure projects, like
Digital
yeah,
infrastructure projects, yeah.
yeah, and like we've been talking with them for a while, and it seems like for the next year, they will again give us some funding, and that will probably make them one of the largest contributors we have. But like again, it's not just like money that gets thrown at you. Like it took a lot of effort from our side to like figure out this funding. But like it will at least make us not have to worry anymore about how to pay the two maintainers paid Robin Collective for the next year. Mostly because our reserves are very low right now. We used to have like $100,000 in reserves. Now it's more like maybe 30,000, which is it's scary to see the number going towards zero. So now like this Sovereign Tech Fund project gives us some breathe for a while.
My experience of Sovereign Tech Fund actually is through other projects where generally, I don't know if this is true for what they're doing with Babel, but there are milestones. Basically, there are deliverables. Is that the case here?
Yes, that is the case. However, like they are quite flexible with what the project is. Like for example, when when Igalia worked with the Sovereign Tech Fund for Test 262, it was easy to say, okay, there is this, and this proposal, so the milestones are writing tests for this, and this. For projects like Babel, there is some of that. Like you can say, oh, there is this proposal to implement in Babel, but also there is things like you just need to spend time triaging issues and going through old stuff and like cleaning everything up. That's, for example, one milestone if it's not really a milestone.
It's great that there's an organization that's specifically tasked with funding digital infrastructure. The XKCD cartoon that everybody uses in their slides about the one thankless maintainer in Nebraska. Sovereign Tech Fund is an example of an organization that's trying to give money to, that thankless maintainer in Nebraska, or, 3 people working part-time on like a really core piece of JavaScript backwards compatibility infrastructure.
Yeah, I wish there was more of that. I believe there is something from the US, or at least there was. I'm not sure about what's the status now.
Pretty sure it's not the status now.
Okay. Probably not, but really, who knows at this point?
But yeah, there were statements from the White House, in the last few years that had a lot to do with maintaining the digital, the digital infrastructure, and also beginning to migrate to like parallel memory safe things as as a basis for our digital future. Like, I agree with you, it's very scary to see the number of something that is like maybe the top few most downloaded things with npm get near a budget of zero, because there is still stuff to do and it's like still widely used. And there's a reason that you supported till node 6 until this long. Like, you would think that you could discontinue node 6 a long time ago, but when you discontinue it, probably somebody is going to get really upset and go, what? So speaking of replacing and keeping up and memory, parallel languages and things like that, I think part of the reason I was saying I don't think that you hear as much about Babel these days is because there are some competitors, or not competitors, but sort of competitors. Like,
Yeah, I mean, we can call them competitors. There is the new generation of tools that's coming up, and like that maybe eventually will replace Babel, and like they are all like written in native languages and 20 times faster than Babel. And like there is SWC, which is written in Rust, and now it's like the one bundled in both in Deno and in Node to strip away TypeScript at runtime. At runtime here is in quotes. Or there's OXC, that is like the new transpiler from the Vite ecosystem that's also written in Rust, and like it's also trying to replace a bunch of other tools other than Babel, like they want to do linting and a bunch of other things. And it's actually very cool to see them popping up like this in the past few years. Like, yes, they're competitors, but it's nice to see that like many of the things we have learned like in the last 10 years have been like incorporating from scratch in those tools. And like they don't have all the technical depth we have, and like they have a much larger performance budget that we have, because like if you're 20 times faster than the alternative, you can add things, and even if you become like twice as low, it's still gonna be like very fast. And
10
like they
times
can,
faster still,
yeah.
right? Like, yeah.
Like I'm hoping that like these new projects will like be able to experiment much more than what Babel can do. Babel will like stick around for very long, because like it's so much used deeply in so many parts of the ecosystem that like you cannot just replace it overnight. But like who knows, maybe in 10 years I can retire as a Babel maintainer, and there will be these other people and these other projects keeping the web alive and doing so many new cool things that we cannot really do today.
Or maybe you just have to become a maintainer one of those projects instead. I don't know that they're like complete overlap in like all of the use cases that Babel serves
Yeah,
either.
there isn't like a true replacement to Babel. Like for the core use case of Babel, which is I give you some code, you transform it to something that works in other browsers. Like they can all do it. But then, for example, many people use Babel with like custom plugins, maybe like some code transformations that are tailored to some specific library or to some specific code pattern that you use in your company. And you cannot really do these things with these like Babel alternatives, which is why they're not just a drop-in replacement for it. Or like even if you can, like I'm pretty sure you can like write your custom transforms on like whatever SWC, for example, parses, and then it gives you some representation of the code and you can transform that. But then like you have to know Rust rather than just hacking your plugin with JavaScript. And like given that the target user of Babel is JavaScript developers, it's probably going to be much easier for them to write things in JavaScript than in other languages. There are also experiments in this area, like to, for example, Deno shipped some linter written in Rust, and it supports plugins written in JavaScript. So eventually, probably these like Babel alternatives will actually solve both the use cases that Babel is solving, but like we're just not there yet.
I think it was a really good chat. I learned a lot. I would encourage people. I know on this podcast we end up somehow talking a lot about sponsorship and funding a lot.
Yeah.
It's not because I like that. It's because it's a huge problem in the ecosystem. And so I know everybody has things that they think should be sponsored, and I just hope that this helps people realize that at least for the near term, it is really worth supporting Babel. So you can go and do that. You can do it on Open Collective or sponsor somebody to do it, or on GitHub sponsors is also a way to do it that's actually more economically efficient.
So where would people go to learn more about Babel if they don't already know and are interested?
There is babel.js.io/videos maybe.
Okay.
That like has a bunch of talks and things and resources like about Babel. They're not super recent because, like as I said, Babel didn't change much in the past like 5 to 8 years. But like there is a lot of resources about like what Babel does, how it does it, what you can do with it, and like how the various parts of it work.
Okay.
Cool.
Very cool. Nick, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.